Hi, welcome, and thanks for attending this safeguarding training for RADA staff. My name is Mike Bryant. I'm the head of student well-being at RADA, and we're going to look at a variety of topics today that can help understand how to look after the well-being of students who attend here. Some of the topics we'll be covering during this session include the following: looking at the duty of care and how safeguarding works at RADA, looking at safeguarding risks, how to recognize them, understanding how to raise a concern and who to speak to, issues around confidentiality, understanding emergency contacts, and knowing about the student well-being service, how to refer to this service and or other support services, and also understanding the legislation around the prevent duty. As an overview for this workshop, we're going to look at what safeguarding means and how it involves protecting people's health, well-being, and human rights. We're going to look at how the organization can work together to help prevent the risk of abuse or neglect and how to stop that from happening. And we're going to talk about who does safeguarding apply to. It applies to, broadly speaking, two different groups: children under the age of 18, and the head of access and participation, which runs a course for 17 to 23-year-olds, is one of the other safeguarding leads. And we're going to also look at adults at risk. An adult at risk is a person who's 18 years or over and who is or may be in need of community care or health care services. There's usually an issue around capacity and or disabilities of some type involved. Adults at risk can also include a person who is unable to take care of him or herself or unable to protect themselves against significant harm or exploitation. In general, we operate the Students of Concern policy, which says that at RADA we apply safeguarding procedures to students who may be at risk of significant harm, even if they might not be technically and legally considered an adult at risk. So this can apply to people who don't have a disability, who do have capacity to make their own decisions. We treat all students of concern with the same safeguarding procedures, but technically there is a difference in who safeguarding legally applies to. We'll talk more about this as we continue. Next, we're going to view a video on YouTube, What is Safeguarding? Adult Safeguarding specifically. This video will show you in a very general way what adult safeguarding is, what to look out for, signs of abuse, and how to report safeguarding issues. Keep in mind this is a very generic video. Later on in the presentation, we'll speak about the specific safeguarding reporting systems that RADA has. But for now, this is just a general overview of adult safeguarding issues and signs of abuse. In the video that you may have just seen, there are 6 safeguarding principles mentioned in the CARE Act 2014, which is the overarching legislation for safeguarding. Those 6 safeguarding principles in the CARE Act involve empowerment, supporting for individuals to make their own decisions, proportionality, offering the least intrusive or restrictive interventions appropriate to the risk presented, partnership, working across services and communities to prevent, detect, and report neglect and abuse, prevention, taking action before harm occurs or risk escalates, protection, supporting those in need as a result of abuse or neglect, and accountability, enabling students and staff to challenge agencies for their responses to those at the risk of harm. This implies a whole university's approach, that no one particular department or group of people are involved, but we all have a collective role to play in safeguarding students. Making safeguarding personal. The phrase making safeguarding personal originated from the local government association and the Association of Directors of Adult Services in England, when in 2010 they published the report Making Safeguarding Personal Guide 2014, which introduced this phrase. The main idea behind making safeguarding personal is to develop responses that are person-led, outcome-focused, and that involve people in a conversation to discuss how best to respond in safeguarding situations in a way that enhances involvement, choice, and control. More specifically, making safeguarding personal, as you can see in the second slide, is about engaging with people, about the outcomes they want. The key principles behind making safeguarding personal in terms of adult safeguarding involve that the work done is person-led, focusing on the individual, and that it's outcome-focused, and that it engages the person and during that process enhances that person's involvement, giving them a sense of choice and control. The result should be that it improves their quality of life, well-being, and in particular their safety. And the shift in this way of working is about moving from a process focus to being, again, a more person-led. The term duty of care in the UK requires UK universities to take reasonable steps to keep students safe and protect their well-being while studying. The exact obligations depend on the circumstances. Here at RADA, we have a duty of care to deliver educational support services to the standard of what would normally be considered a competent institution. And by doing that, we need to act reasonably to protect the health, safety, and welfare of students. So this implies that staff need periodic safeguarding training to be able to recognize the signs of student distress and to also be able to recognize environmental factors and any other issues that the institution may be aware of that may put students at risk. And what are the potential risks that the CARE Act 2014 specifically mentions? These include issues of sexual harassment and violence, domestic violence, neglect, and self-neglect. This also includes psychological abuse, financial and material abuse, modern slavery, discriminatory abuse, and organizational abuse. The second slide shows additional potential risks. These are outside of those included in the CARE Act, but of particular interest are mental health issues and radicalization, which we'll discuss under the PREVENT Act legislation. You'll see that adults have more categories of risk than children do, particularly around issues of financial exploitation and domestic violence. So this is one of the additional issues that we have to be aware of as a training organization. At this point, I'd like to invite you to try this exercise. A 5-minute exercise of identifying the signs of abuse. Spend 5 minutes just reviewing the previous slide on potential risk. Write down any warning signs that you would expect to see for any of these types of maltreatment. For example, physical warning signs, behavioral warning signs, so forth. I'll pause the video at this point so that you can review what you've written. Let's look at some of the issues around risk, particularly mental health issues. On this slide, you'll see a list of some of the typical mental health conditions that are clinically diagnosable. They may range in their severity and vary from individual. The treatments will also depend on the individuals and their situations, but these include such things as depression, anxiety, disordered eating, post-traumatic stress, self-harm issues, suicidal thoughts, particularly those that lead to plans. It's not uncommon for people to have suicidal thoughts, but we're talking about those that may point towards people planning on taking actions to harm themselves. Under mental health issues, we also have a range of body image issues which can result from perceiving one's body negatively and inaccurately. Treatments are available, and discussions around this are important to have with students in order to point them towards sources of help. RADA takes seriously any issues around sexual harassment and violence. And if the abuse is historic, you'll be offered support. If the abuse is recent, we will discuss with students about a choice and what type of support they would like to have. We also would challenge any sort of rape myths or those inaccurate beliefs or stereotypes around sexual assault that shift blame from perpetrators to victims. Also on this slide are some of the statistics around those who experience sexual violence and how few will report those to the police. RADA students also are able to attend consent and power in relationships training run by Tinder to help be more aware of the issues around what is consent and what is not consent. Issues of risk around domestic and intimate relationship abuse may also occur, especially between intimate partners or family members, regardless of gender or sexuality. Abuse can encompass, but isn't limited to, psychological, physical, sexual, financial, and social abuse. It has been reported that nearly 21% of higher education students have experienced dating violence by a current partner, and 32% have experienced dating violence from a previous partner. Now we'd like to look at another type of case study exercise that's often done in the live classes, involving looking at types of abuse in a case scenario, the risk factors, and what steps would be taken to address immediate safety needs. In the following slide, where we discuss a case study, a hypothetical case, we'll also ask you to think about what other agencies or risk factors might need to be involved, and what preventative measures could be taken to avoid this situation. So in the next slide, we'll talk about a hypothetical case and then ask you to review these questions of what types of abuse or neglect are involved, the risk factors, and what steps you might take to address the immediate safety needs, the agencies and resources you might contact, and what preventative measures. Now, we'd like for you to read the case study here and think about the questions in the previous slide. Sarah is a 20-year-old who suffers from clinical depression and has had a previous sexual assault prior to coming to RADA. She was very excited about getting a leading role in her third-year RADA play, but the lead actor, Tom, started aggressively coming on to her. Despite her protests, Tom persisted, kissed, and attempted to undress Sarah after rehearsal one night. Sarah reported this to the stage manager, but they were reluctant to confront Tom out of concern for disrupting the production. Now, given this scenario, try to look back at the previous questions in the previous slide and think about what types of abuse or neglect might be occurring in the scenario, what the risk factors might be that make this person at risk. What steps would you take to address the immediate safety needs. But you contact any other agencies or resources, and what preventative measures might have been possible to avoid this situation. Have a think. The Mental Capacity Act, 2005, establishes a framework for acting and decision-making on behalf of those who lack capacity. The Act provides a process to assess if someone lacks mental capacity for important, specific decisions. It outlines principles such as a presumption of capacity of the individual and supporting individuals to make their own decisions where possible. And it allows appointment of independent advocates to support and represent individuals. The 5 principles involve looking at a presumption of capacity, helping individuals make their own decisions, and not letting a subjective view of an unwise decision be synonymous with lacking capacity, and looking at the best interests and less restrictive options for the individual whose capacity is being questioned. How are RADA staff trained to respond to a safeguarding issue? By letting the student know that they will have to pass the concern on if it's once shared. By staff listening carefully and recording any relevant information. Part of this training would be about that staff understand that they need to speak to their line manager or one of the designated safeguarding leads within RADA within 24 hours of hearing anything that you might deem potentially a safeguarding issue. If you do receive information around safeguarding issues from a student, please don't speak to anyone else about the concern, and please keep any information that is written private and confidential. Who are the designated safeguarding leads within RADA? The designated safeguarding officer for RADA is the registrar, Angela Taylor. The designated safeguarding lead is myself, Mike Bryant, head of student well-being. We have an open door policy about anyone wanting to speak about any concerns they may have around safeguarding, concerns or questions. What do the designated safeguarding leads do? The DSLs, as they're called, consult with the student who raised the concern. We make an assessment of the risk involved. We make decisions about what action to take. We keep the student at risk at the center of any decision making that may occur. We keep a written record of decisions and actions, and we keep a written record of that is private and confidential. And we keep the students collaborating with us so they have a sense of control and choice in the process moving forward. So if you're worried about another student or for students who are having difficulties, you can speak to Angela Taylor or myself, Mike Bryant. Students can speak to any tutors, and the tutors can contact course director or the safeguarding leads. The prevent duty is a legal duty in the UK that aims to reduce the threat of terrorism by preventing people from being drawn into terrorism. It was introduced as part of the Counterterrorism and Security Act 2015, and it applies to RADA, other universities, healthcare providers, prisons. It requires that organizations such as RADA have a due regard to the need to prevent people from being drawn into terrorism. And by terrorism, we mean all forms of terrorism, not only just extremism, far-right politics, but also any type of hate groups. And bodies covered by the duty must assess the risk of radicalization in their institution and develop policies to help reduce this risk. Staff must be trained to recognize the signs of radicalization and know how to refer on to safeguarding designated lead officers and have protocols about sharing information about adults at risk and ways to provide support and care for those who have been exposed to extremist ideologies. Training on the PREVENT Act is mandatory for all RADA staff and volunteers. The training can be accessed through a separate free government PREVENT Act training, which is accessible to anyone online. So this has the audience of speaking to students so that staff can be aware of what we say to students. The next slide asks, what is expected of students? Students don't have a duty of care. The organization has a duty of care. Students can sometimes be confused about that when they have positions of responsibility, such as being stage managers, but the duty of care, it should be clear, lies with the organization. Students are not responsible for protecting other students from harm in the same way that staff members are. So we encourage students to speak to a member of staff if they're worried about another student or if they themselves are risking harm. If a student passes on a concern to a member of staff, they should know they won't be identified if they don't want to be. When a student speaks to a member of staff about a concern, however, the staff cannot keep the information secret. The staff member must pass the information on. Students themselves are expected to take responsibility for their own behavior and to adhere to RADA's Code of Conduct and the Respect at RADA policy, which is available through SharePoint and also through the internet. The next few slides are about RADA's report and support process. If a student prefers, they can report a concern about someone in the RADA community, not only a student, but a member of staff, even a member of the public. The report and support website will only be seen by those directly involved in handling student complaints. The concern might be about a student directly, a member of staff, for example, bullying or feeling harassed, or the concern might be about someone else. A student, member of staff, or a member of the public can choose to give their name or to remain anonymous. If the person logging the concern makes an anonymous report, RADA will keep a record of the concern, but cannot investigate it due to the lack of information about who's making the complaint. If someone makes a report on the website and they give their name, someone will get in touch with that person to discuss the concern in more detail. We also try to let students know that it's important to nominate a person who they're happy for RADA to contact in the event of an emergency. So it doesn't have to be a family member, but it needs to be someone who's mature and has the capacity to respond. We have an emergency procedure for any things that come up, such as people expressing self-harm, intentions, or sexual assault, or serious struggles with drug or alcohol use, or who have serious class attendance issues. Sometimes we have contact with external agencies. This slide looks at in what sort of situations that might occur. When people come to report a concern, when students in particular come to report a concern, we try to support them so that it can be their decision whether to report a crime. If someone's in immediate danger of violence while they're in the building, frequently the duty managers will work with them and also contact one of the senior leadership team members. When and if there may be a risk to a child, one of the DSLs, designated safeguarding leads, will get in touch with the NSPCC or the police. And we would try to inform the person who's reporting that so that it's done in consultation with that student. If someone discloses suicidal thoughts or self-harm, we ask and strongly encourage them to get in touch with their GP. The Student Wellbeing Service is available to students who want to have a confidential space where they can talk about any of the issues affecting them emotionally and the demands of the training. We keep everything private, confidential, and we try to support you. We can offer face-to-face or online sessions. If you don't know where we're located, we're in Cheney Street, accessible through the library on the ground floor. We offer a range of supports, one-to-one therapy, drop-in sessions. If the door is open, you can often drop in. We have a disability service within the Student Wellbeing Service and a counseling service. And we have different specialisms within both those two areas. Drug and alcohol support, eating disorders, body image work, trauma counseling, and helping people to access medical services. In this next slide on RADA's policies and procedures, we show you both the safeguarding relevant policies and the students of concern policies. The safeguarding policies are the safeguarding policy, student well-being service policy, the support to study policy. Separate to safeguarding are additionally relevant topics around students of concern, the mental health strategy, and the drug and alcohol policy. There are a range of different reports on this further slide called Further Information, which may be of interest to students. And we'd also finally like to mention Papyrus, which is a UK charity involved with prevention of young suicides, young people who are suicidal. It's a charity and hotline, and it has a 24/7 telephone support line called Hotline, an 0800 number, which is given here. Papyrus comes into RADA from time to time and offers services, specialist trainings for staff. So this sort of concludes the end of our safeguarding workshop. If you have any queries, feel free to contact any of the safeguarding leads, myself, and safeguarding officer, Angela Taylor. Thank you for listening.